Recently, where I live, it has been snowing a lot, and that combined with me talking about Pikmin a lot, has got me to think about the snowy areas in the series. Naturally, when thinking about the two areas, being the Valley of Repose from Pikmin 2 and the distant Tundra from Pikmin 3, you can't help but think that one of them is better than the other. To determine which one is objectively better, I will go over 5 different sections of the areas that make them what they are. Those being the scenery in the area, the music, the wildlife, the gameplay and the puzzles, and finally, the story and reason as to why you were there in the first place. After comparing the two areas in these categories, I shall decide which area wins that category, me being a completely unbiased judge and all. And whichever area has the most points at the end is definitively the best snowy area in Pikmin. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. The first thing I'm going to discuss about these two areas is the scenery. Now, like I mentioned before, both of these areas are snowy, obviously, but this does not mean they both look the same. The Valley of Repose starts off as a generic snowy forest kind of deal, but later the ground turns to gravel, and there appears to be a giant manhole cover. This is probably something you'll think is cool, but then forget about in a few seconds. But if you look at a top-down view of the Valley of Repose, then you'll see some white lines on the far end of the map. And the manhole cover is right next to it, with a small dirt area on both sides of it. All of these by themselves is nothing special, but when you look at it all together, it starts to look like a crosswalk. Albeit a very snowed over and flooded crosswalk, but a crosswalk nonetheless. Now I didn't know about this until a few weeks ago, but I thought it was the coolest thing and an amazing Easter egg. Like, it was just so cool to find that out. Now moving over to the distant Tundra, it looks like a tundra alright. No Easter eggs like the Valley of Repose, and there are also a lot of caves in the distant Tundra, so you don't even see the snowy surface all that much. Which, if you're there for like a view, then that's what you're there for. So even though the graphics of Pikmin 3 are better, it doesn't compare to the awesome immersion of the real world in Pikmin 2. So I will be giving the Scenery Award to the Valley of Repose. Moving on to the next section, which is the music. To start this off, I'm going to give you guys a little quiz. I'm going to play the music of these two areas, and you can guess which music belongs to which area. So I'm going to be starting the first music now. Okay, that should be long enough. And now for the second area, starting now. That should be good. So, now that you've heard the music, you should know that the first music belongs to the Valley of Repose, and the second one, of course, belongs to the cold ambience from Breath of the Wild. Now I know what you're thinking. Haha, AKB Rhino, funny joke, but you said that you would play the music from the distant Tundra. Well, you see, the distant Tundra music is so generic that I could have played any Tundra music from any game, and you probably wouldn't have even noticed. And then if you listen to the distant Tundra's music, then you can hear some of the Valley of Repose's motifs occasionally. And while it's a cool Easter egg, they are taking sounds from another Tundra area. So this just further proves my point that the distant Tundra has some pretty generic music. And because it's generic, it isn't nearly as good as the Valley of Repose itself, because the music in the distant Tundra sounds so empty and dead, which makes it feel less exciting to explore the area. While on the other hand, the music in the Valley of Repose is so alive. It makes it exciting to explore. My friend Josh recently played Pikmin 2, and he kept mentioning the bells in the background that made the music much more fun to listen to and explore with. So the music award will be going to the Valley of Repose as well. The next comparison between the two areas is the wildlife in the area. Now, if you think Tundra, you probably aren't thinking of an area full of creatures waiting to kill you. So I will be grading this area more so based on if the area has enough enemies that it doesn't feel empty, but not too much that it feels unnatural. We started with the distant Tundra last time, so we'll start with the Valley of Repose. The Valley of Repose at the beginning of the game has 3 enemies in total. And when I say beginning, I mean before you go to the Awakening Wood. 2 of those enemies are small dwarf bulborbs, and the other one is just a regular bulborb. Now when you hear this, you're probably thinking that the Valley of Repose is the most desolate place ever. But like I said, this is the beginning of the game, so you still have an entire other area to explore once you bring Blue Pikmin there. And once you go past that area, enemies are everywhere. You go over there, burrowing snagret. Over here, fiery bullflax. I honestly never realized how many enemies there were until I played again recently, but there are just so many of them. And all of them feel like they were just thrown in to fill up a weirdly high quota. None of them feel like they fit in. Unlike the Distant Tundra, which has the perfect amount of enemies, and all of those enemies feel like they fit into a snowy tundra. In the Distant Tundra, there are a lot of enemies that are buried in the snow, like the cannon beetles and the joust mites, that avoid the cold by staying underground. And then there are a lot of fire enemies, which makes sense why they're there, because if they're on fire or use fire, then they could use that to warm themselves up and survive. And the rest of the enemies either have lots of hair, like the bearded amp rats, that keep them warm, or are in caves to survive. And the best part is that they're all spread out equally, so it never feels like there are too many or too little enemies in one particular area. And all this combined makes it obvious why the Distant Tundra wins the Wildlife Award. The next section we'll be covering is the gameplay and the puzzles of the areas. The Valley of Repose is one of the smaller areas in Pikmin 2, so already there is less space to explore, which means less puzzles as well. And even then, there aren't any. If you look around the Valley of Repose, there are no puzzles. The closest thing that I can possibly think of that might be considered a puzzle is the fiery bullflax treasure, because you have to lead it into the water so it is no longer on fire. But that isn't all that hard to figure out, nor is it fun to do. This is because the Valley of Repose is from Pikmin 2, and if you know anything about Pikmin 2, then you know that caves are the main focus. So the Valley of Repose is more like an area to put the caves and then add a few treasures to the surface so it isn't obvious. And the gameplay echoes just that, because the caves are all very easy to get to after you kill about 3 enemies and knock down a wall. It's almost like the only original area from Pikmin 2 was used to pad out the game. And when you look at the Distant Tundra, everything is exponentially better gameplay-wise, even though the Distant Tundra didn't even have to try to make better gameplay than the Valley of Repose. The Distant Tundra has some of the more unique puzzles in the series. At the very beginning of the area, you have to share Pikmin with Brittany, for reasons I will explain in the next section, in order to build 2 separate bridges from 2 separate parts of the map that connect together so Alph and Brittany can reunite. This puzzle alone makes the gameplay in the Distant Tundra better than the Valley of Repose. But then it's made even better in the Behemoth Phosphat fight. But then it's made even better in the Behemoth Phosphat fight. In the boss fight, you have to build a bridge to turn on a huge light bulb, and to do that, you have to go around the arena and collect the pieces to build said bridge, all while turning on smaller lights to prevent the Phosphat from eating your Pikmin. This boss fight is one of, if not the best representation of Pikmin gameplay ever. And the Valley of Repose can't do something like this because, like I said, Pikmin 2 focuses on the caves, so there just isn't enough space to do it. And so the Distant Tundra will receive the Gameplay Award. I honestly didn't expect this to come down to a tiebreaker, but here we are, the final section to talk about, that being the reason why you are in the area in the first place. Like I've said before in this video, you start your Pikmin 2 adventure in the Valley of Repose, so there isn't much backstory as to why you're there. All you get is the opening cutscene where the president tells you to go back to PNF 404 to collect treasure to pay off the debt, and then you crash there. And the only reason to go back later is to get more treasure in the other 2 caves. This is such an incredibly boring motivator to go there. It feels like you're in that area at the beginning by chance, and you might as well make the best of it, and then you go back there because you have to. Pretty much anything could beat this story-wise, and the Distant Tundra does 3 separate things capable of beating anything the Valley of Repose has, all by themselves. The Distant Tundra has a lot of similarities as the Valley of Repose, besides them both being snowy biomes. For one, the Distant Tundra is also the beginning area for Pikmin 3, and both of the areas are the crash site of the game. But it's way different this time around in Pikmin 3. All 3 of the captains start in 3 different places, but the player starts with Charlie, who crashes in the Distant Tundra, and his journey serves as the tutorial, and after running around for about 10 minutes, Charlie gets attacked, and the screen fades to black. And now you're with Alph for the rest of the game. This is an amazing start to the game, and gives you a reason to want to go back to the Distant Tundra later in the game. And then when you go back to the Distant Tundra, you crash again, which leads to Brittany and Alph getting separated. And you have to complete the very cool bridge puzzle I talked about in the last section to get back together and go find Charlie. And when you find him, he tells you that Olimar has the Cosmic Drive Key, which you need to go and get, so you can leave. And then you go off to find Olimar, and you never have to come back to the Distant Tundra unless you need to get more fruit, which you shouldn't have to if you aren't playing at a snail's pace. Now this is an amazing way to hook people into going to the Distant Tundra, and it doesn't overstay its welcome at all, so it should be very clear why the Distant Tundra wins the Story Award. Now that the debating is over, we can tally up the awards, and because I'm an unbiased judge, the Distant Tundra wins, with a total of 3 awards. Now if I was a biased judge, I would say that the Valley of Repose wins, because I have a soft spot for it in my heart. Probably because of nostalgia, but since we're going off of facts, then the Distant Tundra wins. And if you go watch my main Pikmin area ranking video, just know that I may have treated the Distant Tundra a little bit harshly. But with that, I've been AQB Rhino, and I'll see you in the next video.